excited to introduce our next speaker is Mr. Dale Smith. He's the creative director of Bridge Training and Events. He's definitely has a wonderful bio, and I suggest everyone hop on and read that, but he is passionate about people, leadership, and creating internal brand ambassadors that excel at promoting excellence in customer and employee experiences. I love that. Sounds amazing. And his presentation today is something we've all been talking about quite a lot the last year and a half, is hybrid and virtual working, connecting the human elements and human elements of service excellence. So we're so glad to have you, Dale, and welcome.
Hello.
And I'll turn the floor over to you.
Great. As you know, my name is Dale Smith. I'm creative director at Bridge. And I wanted to bring this first slide because a lot of the work that we do around Bridge is around brand, employee engagement, customer experience. And this all sat in two worlds, one pre-pandemic and now post-pandemic. However, there is something that needs to exist and as we go forward within the organizations. And so I always start with the Bridge slide. And this is the Bridge brand and the Bridge logo. And it's very intentional, and the design was very intentional. The yellow, which is a half circle, represents our partnership and our lighthearted partnership with our clients. Because the other half is our client, and it's yet to be formed. But together, we'll make a full circle. Those two little lines that you see are very clearly and very specifically put in place. And they're designed so that they are our strategic ability, that we work in parallel and we work alongside our clients. And then that big red happy arrow pointing up is our creativity and the way we approach every project with a new level of insight and creativity. And Bridge is connecting employees to the organizations they work for. Now, I'm not telling you that to sell Bridge, but I want us to all start to think about how we communicate our brand messaging, our communication to our employees and our customers by sometimes in the smallest amounts of detail. But it needs to be intentional, and especially in a hybrid working model. The first slide that I was looking at was the Bridge values. And the reason I wanted to put the values up is because it's very intentional that we begin to look at our brands and how we communicate it pre-pandemic. Because this is a lot of the work that Bridge had done over the last 20 years, is we go into organizations and we look at those true brand values and the behaviors that they represent. And the great thing that when I started looking at them for this presentation is they're still relevant because it is who we are as an organization. It doesn't matter the working practices. It doesn't matter what's happening externally. It should be about how we redefine them in the current working models. The five Bridge values are inspiring collaborative energy and be collaborative. And that's key in this current climate. Sharing knowledge openly and communication is key in any hybrid model. And it's about how we can share and represent the knowledge that we have to other people in the team. Keeping it real and fun. I think, if anything, we need to have a little bit of more of a light heart in the current climate and how we represent that to other people within the team. Pushing creative boundaries. And I have to say, over these last 2 years, I have seen some of the most remarkable boundaries being pushed in creative ways. And then always celebrate uniqueness. I think it's one of our core values because it's so important to recognize that we're all in this together and we're all unique in our own individual ways. And everybody brings something important to the party. So on the pre-pandemic, and again, these would be on my slide deck, but on the pre-pandemic, a lot of the work that we were doing was looking at how do we get organizations to change? And it's quite interesting because there was a period that, when we started talking about remote working, and that's been going on probably for the last 5 or more years, but there was a lot of resistance toward even remote working, forgetting hybrid models. And when talking about change to organizations, we often are confronted, or we were often confronted with a lot of, we can't change because. We can't change because we don't have the budget. We can't change because we're regulated. We won't get the buy-in from our people. The leadership doesn't feel that it's appropriate. There was a lot of resistance around change. And that's always been there. And of course, that's always going to be there to a certain degree. And then came the pandemic. And then all of a sudden, overnight, change was thrust upon us. And to me, that's when people are at their best. Sometimes in times of diversity, at times of real change being thrust upon us, you start to see how teams really come together and can really make true change and a true difference. So when we're looking at this time of change, it reminds me of a story when I was kind of looking at this presentation. It was about probably 6-7 years ago, and we were preparing for a big client launch. And my team had been preparing for probably weeks. And everybody had different parts to play within the launch. There was design work and content work, and all of this was coming together. And the day before, as we were starting to put everything together, so doing our run-throughs, our server got a virus. And that was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And as you can imagine, panic struck. And everybody came together and started pulling things from different resources, different libraries, different laptops, and we're recreating files at a speed that took us weeks to put together. And I remember sitting there about 11 o'clock at night, and we'd ordered pizza, and I was sitting at my desk, and we had a big open plan office, and I was looking at everybody, and I almost had a parental pride of watching everybody come together. And I think that's the things we got to recognize in times of challenge, how we can respond when we really look at how we are come together as a team. So next slide. So I think first off, going back 2 years, we really need to take our hats off to leaders, HR teams, and all of our employees for the way in which we confronted this immediate fear, this immediate challenge that happened. And all of a sudden, new words start appearing like social distancing and masks and uncertainty and how we productivity and furlough. And at that time, everybody seemed to start to come together. In my world, they did anyway. And I reached out to many clients, and people were having to send people on furlough. And I was giving a lot of advice and working with organizations on having to write copy and how to communicate with their employees of what was going on. And everybody just seemed to embrace the change, I found. Now, I'm not saying that for everybody because it was a lot to take on. But when you go back and look at that, what was the key factor was communication. Those who did well were communicating well. And looking at a bit of research that I came across is that 66% of employees are confident their companies are going to come these challenges. And of those, that number bumps up to 82 for those employees that felt they were well informed. So communication is going to be key with hybrid models. And then I kind of looked at my own story and how I felt about hybrid. Can we swap slides? There we go. Thank you. And I found myself a little bit stuck at the beginning. And me as a change agent, I found myself stuck in this world of nostalgia. I wanted it to go back the way it used to be. I loved my job. I loved as a consultant going into organizations and working with great teams and making great organizations. And we spent a lot of time and money over the last probably 5 to 10 years building great communities and cultures within organizations, looking at the environment, how they, anywhere from design to how people lived in the values every day on site. And that's what I kept going back to, I'm just not convinced this is ever going to work. And as I started looking over the last year at the hybrid models, I had to ask myself, why? Why was I so stuck and so convinced that this wasn't going to work? Because I was so stuck in the past that I wanted to go back the way it used to be. Or maybe I'm just old. Maybe I'm a little stuck in my ways. Maybe my desire to have what I really loved and knew was so much greater than my openness as a change agent. And then I had to begin to recreate that balance. And so that's my advice to people is, it's normal for us to go backwards and look at the nostalgia. Can I go next slide? But that's how we're going to go forward. There's a lot of great stuff we used to be doing. Okay, and that great stuff and the way we communicated with our employees, the way we built great communities, we built great teams, all that great stuff that was pre-pandemic, that we want to bring forward. But this journey going forward to what will be the new models and how we work, those journeys should not be clouded by the change of the past. This is a great opportunity for organizations to look at new ways of working while still embracing the great stuff that they have with their employees. However, we've got to accept that times have changed. And the more that we embrace going forward, the more opportunity we have to bring the good stuff with us. So one of the models that I built for a particular client, if we can go to the next slide. Yeah. There's another guy called the Human at Work Resilience Model. Now, this wasn't just based on the pandemic that we've just experienced. This is looking at how disruptors have influenced the way in which we work. Its influences on how we work when there's a disruptor in place. And this goes back to, say, the stock market crash in the 1930s or 1920s. Areas such as even World War II, looking at, in just my lifetime, we've had a few disruptors. I remember I was working at Your Money Publishing. I was working in the events as the director of events for, as I said, Your Money. And that was in the late 90s. All of a sudden, we started getting all these influence around financial crashes happening all around us. And that changed the way we worked. And I remember one of the clients sitting down with me, and he was just floored by the fact that his budget had been slashed to only $30 or £30 for lunch with clients. And what that did was it changed the way in which people were spending money, company money. Yeah. So when we look at, and then we had things like September the 11th, I was setting up my first events company at the time. We were in our first year of trading. We started with one event to begin with, and we were events, and things were looking incredibly great. We had 3 events going on in London, and we had 2 events going on in New York, and September the 11th happened. And that disruptor changed the way we worked forever, but it actually changed the way in which my organization could go forward as a business during that time. So when we look at this, we start with number 1, which is our normal. That's where we're at our most comfortable. Things are going fine. Why change things because they're not broken? And then if a disruptor happens, such as the pandemic, that's when challenge really begins to happen for us, because that force is an external force and it's outside of our control. However, as that begins to move forward, we have to move into tier 3 very quickly, and that's innovation. And look at new matrices and new ways of working that can be controlled by and considerate of the new forces that are in play. And then when we get to 4, that's our new normal. Now, I'm not a big fan of the word new normal because, I don't know, it doesn't ever sits well with me. I like to call it the new now more than the new normal, but I kept new normal in there so I could make that point. Because there was nothing normal about section 4. That's when we are trying to find our way, and we've got models that we're working to, but yet those forces of disruptor and our model are not working in a very easy parallel. That's why we have 5, and that's where I think we are getting to right now. As things begin to settle a little bit more, now we know Delta is out there and things are still challenging us, but this is our opportunity to start embedding and refining what models are going to work for us. And this is where hybrid sits for me right now. We're still in 4 and 5. We've done the innovation. We're kind of moving into the new now, but we're still now going to start to figure out what works, because nobody quite knows exactly what's working best for the organization. And that's that acceptance that we have to have before we can ever move into 6, where we feel comfortable again. And unfortunately, chances have it, because history tells us, we will repeat this cycle at some point. But then that keeps us moving forward as organizations, because we cannot predict sometimes as disruptors. So I began to look at the first part of my research around hybrid models was around some of the headlines. And these were kind of the headlines that I was seeing. And again, because I was still in my uncomfortable phase, I looked at these through a very different lens. Oh, they're just trying to shove hybrid working down my throat. I want to go back to the old way we used to work. And I needed to get to a stage of my own thought process where I began to flip that coin. because I could look at these as somebody else trying to push the hybrid model, even though it wasn't one that I felt was correct for the industry, because I was still stuck in the old way. I changed my perspective and began to say, yeah, okay, so these are hybrid models that are here to stay. And we need to begin to embrace them, because things that are coming out of after post-pandemic have changed the way in which we work, and we cannot go backwards. And then I began to look at myself as a change agent and going, yeah, this is the stuff I've been preaching to organizations for the last 20 years. Now I begin to need to implode it on myself. So I had a light bulb moment, which is in the next slide. And I changed the lens, because this is actually quite an exciting time for us. We can either see it as daunting and more work and I want to go back, or this is a true opportunity for us to begin to shake off some of those chains of the past and look at really great new ways of working that can help with this balance of work and life in a more harmonious way. And it is very much about how we can begin to look at some of the processes and streamline. There's a great theory, and I don't know if anybody has read any of Malcolm Gladwell's work, but called the tipping point. And the theory that he has within the tipping point, that everything in life, whether it be the stock market to us as individuals, reach a tipping point. We get so much of something that all of a sudden it changes trajectory and starts moving in another way. And I think the pandemic did that for us. I think as organizations, we weren't getting fast enough on mental health and work-life balance and changes that were more human for our employees. So the universe sent us something. And so it either can be daunting, or we can look at it in the purest of ways and see it as an opportunity. So what I do with anything when I'm trying to figure it all out, I start my research. And my research comes in many ways. I read lots of different articles. I look at lots of bits of research. And because I love to talk to people, I just reach out to as many people that will listen and as many people as I can talk to. So first off, thank you for everybody over the last several months that I've interviewed and chatted to about their hybrid working models, their feelings about hybrid working, and what's working and not working. If I can go to the next slide, please. So I've kind of condensed it down into 3 individual models. And this comes from speaking to a lot of people and looking at what was working for many of our clients. And the 3 models that I'm just going to quickly go over for you is remote first, office occasional, and office first and remote allowed. So these are very big brushstroke models. So looking at remote first, if we go to the next slide. Yep, thank you. If we look at remote first, there's going to be pros and cons to every one of these models. And one of my clients in New York is doing this incredibly well, but they moved to a remote first model. And in that is everybody within the organization works remotely first. They've kept their office space, but the office space then now is not for going to the office. It's for collaborating at the office. So if people need to go there to collaborate with a team or clients or do something, the office space is still available to them, but it's not for them to go to work for that day. And that's why the remote first model is quite clear on what it asks people to do. Some of the pros that I've noticed in some of the remote first models, and you can look at Dropbox if you want to see what they're doing, and a couple of other big organizations are doing this remote first. But they've basically said to their people from the senior leadership down to the office that they are all to work remote. Now, some of the pros of that is it opens up a talent pool for them because they're not restricted to core areas anymore. Therefore, they can open up their recruitment model to bring in more talent from across, in this case, the United States, but globally. And with having the leadership all off-site, I think what the theory behind that is that I keep coming up with is they don't want the leaders in the office, because if the leaders were in the office, then certain individuals will follow and they will go to the office, creating kind of a mixed this and them culture within the organization. So by just ripping the Band-Aid off and putting it all out to the remote workforce, then they're creating more equality within their team. And that's kind of the way they're working. And there's some great content around that. Some of the cons of that is being a people lover, that we are unable to meet with our teams. However, the way some of organizations are looking at that is creating co-working. So people who are in the same cities are able to meet to co-work and maybe just buddy up for a day so that they can get some human contact with the teammates. But again, that's, to me, is always going to be a slight con if we go to remote first. Things that you can do with that is very much around having yearly events where everybody comes together and looking at it from that perspective. Okay, so we go to the next one. This is the one I'm seeing most in the market, and I've interviewed several people around this, and it's office occasional. So if that's what I consider almost the truest of hybrid models, where people are working from home and from the office. And there's quite a diverse range that I came across these, and some are very loose in their policy, which made me a little uncomfortable because it kind of created a bit of uncertainty. And then some are very strategic and very planned guidelines. So the four that I think I identified in speaking to individuals, if we go to the next slide. Thank you very much. Is these four models: is the Atwill model, the split week model, the shift model, and the week by week model. And I interviewed people in each one of these areas. And one of the people that I interviewed, and this was only a few weeks ago, at the Atwill model. And that model, what that looks like, if you go to the next slide, thank you, is that people can go, as it says, at will to the office when they want to go, when they are required to go, just because they would need a quiet place to work, or they could put in a request to go because they want to go and do something specific. And what I noticed with this model, is at the Atwill, it didn't have a whole lot of structure to it. And the person that I interviewed felt slightly uncomfortable because one day that he just went to the office, and of a 3-person footprint in the office, there was only about 20 people there that day. And with that, he was leaving with a sense that the company was broken in some way. It didn't sit emotionally well with him. To go to the organization and see it kind of empty like that gave him a sense of doom and gloom. And so we have to be very careful with that model, the Atwill model, about how employees might be perceiving it. It's great to have it, but it needs some structure. I think where I see the most success is in the next model, because it's building on that one, and that's the split week model. One of the people I interviewed as a leader have a very clear structure of the way they organize the week. The person that I was speaking with came in on a Monday and a Wednesday, and all of their team came in on a Monday, Wednesday. And so every couple of weeks they would change it around, but they would also structure around projects. So if a particular team needed to work with another team, they would both come in on the Monday. But people were given advance notice, so they could obviously look at childcare and what they needed to. But they tried to keep it as much as to the same days as possible for individuals. But the split week model meant that people could come into the organization and still feel the vibrance of the team and also engage with other teams that they required to. So I think this was probably the model that I felt most comfortable with personally. The next model that we looked at was the shift work model. And that's where people were kind of split between a morning shift and an afternoon shift. And again, I met 2 organizations that were trialing this, but early feedback suggests that people just don't like shift work, unless that's the way they had worked in the past. But now moving into a hybrid model where they were working at different times of the day, even though it meant they worked part of the day at home, part of the day at work, it still had a lot of, I think, massaging to do. It also, the early feedback that we got from individuals, it was really hard for them to set up childcare solutions in that model. And then the final model that we looked at was a week by week, very much similar to the earlier one where people would come in a couple of times a week. It was 1 week, 1 week on, 1 week off. This worked great for people that had larger teams and more projects that needed a bit more time to work together. However, it still had some massaging to do with the way in which employees felt about that, because many people were still feeling that it was hard for them to balance how they were going to manage that hybrid working in terms of the other commitments that they had. Okay, so those were some of the models that we worked with. But in interviewing all the people, the one thing that seemed to consistently come up was that the biggest requirement to be productive while working from home was regular communication with their direct manager. That they needed to have that direct contact with their manager, so that during this transitional period of working from home and feeling this connection to the organization, when that was severed, we began to see less commitment from the employees that are working from home. Another piece of research that I pulled out, and again, I've got so many slides that bits of research. Can we go to the next one, please? Yeah, was about how teams communicate with their teams. And again, this was done probably mid-pandemic, this piece of research here. But 53% of employees said that they only had some communication with their team, where 67% of middle managers felt that they communicated often and effectively with their teams. So there seemed to be a very differencing of opinions. Even though people were getting the connection with their managers, they were not getting that regular communication with their team. So that's something that we need to recognize as we build employee engagement and team building models, that we need to find that hybrid model that allows people to communicate with their managers, because that's a definite, and also with their teammates, so they feel part of a community. And the last piece of research, and this comes from a study that was done recently in the UK, and it showed that there's a bit of a divide there, that 61% of senior managers felt that their tasks and priorities were well-defined, where employees or middle managers only felt 45% of that was being done. And so there's a lot of work to be done around how we communicate priorities to our team members and the people that are on the shop floor. Okay, so next slide. Great. So what are some of the key factors of what makes a healthy hybrid community? And I'm breaking this down, and as I say, with these slides, you'll get a copy of them, and I intentionally made them a little bit more text heavy so that you would have these to take away. But if we're going to be moving to hybrid models have to be supported by a healthy hybrid culture, by people who accept and are participants in that. And I think this is in the early days, this is where I began to struggle, because I had spent the last probably 15 years of my career building internal community cultures. But most of that work is the same. And what I'm beginning to recognize is some of the faults that we were struggling with in terms of some of the previous organizations that needed to have Bridge come in with them, is some of the things that we can now fix because we're working with a blank sheet of paper in many ways. And the first one is being, if we go to the next slide, it's kind of off a little bit, but that word that's up there is intentionality. We need to be intentional. And as we move to a hybrid model, we need to be much more intentional. Intentional in our communication, as that requires more planning and specifics. One of the areas, again, pre-pandemic was onboarding. What was people's onboarding and induction process like? And there was more organizations that were coming to us in the pre-pandemic, looking at their induction program so they can be more value-based, more exciting, and more empowering. And this is something that really definitely needs intention in looking at in a hybrid model, is how are we going to onboard our community? It's not like the old days where you could just get them to buddy up with somebody in the office and they show them around and everybody feels great and then they can watch and see the environment. We're going to be onboarding people now that are going to be working from home or working in a hybrid community. So that is something that needs a lot more consideration and intention on how we're going to do that. I think setting very clear expectations and goals and respecting the way in which people are going to be working from home versus the office, like do not disturb times. Because what I began to notice was some of the early modeling of people working, and whether that be the mixed modeling or the remote only, is this work-life balance that we were trying to achieve is not being always achieved because people are working later, they're at their computers longer, they're not intentionally balancing it because they're kind of being overconsumed just trying to figure stuff out. And the number of people that I'm talking to that have Zoom fatigue is becoming excessive. So we need to really put those working expectations in place for our employees. And I guess, like in my case as well, we need to put some of our opinions aside. We need to embrace hybrid modeling. And whether my opinion might want to go nostalgic or go forward, sometimes our opinions have to be the way in which we present these intentional models, because these are the new ways of working. The next slide is trust. In all of the research, and there was some great Gallup research that I was reading a couple of weeks ago, and all of the interviewing that I did, trust came up in every single piece of research and every single conversation I had with people. And it's this micromanagement thing, because we need people to be accountable for their actions, and therefore we need to begin to trust a little bit more. People are adults, and we need to begin to treating them like adults. We need to give people autonomy, but that autonomy is going to be bound by trust. And from that, we need to begin to look at the way in which, as leaders, we monitor. I know some organizations have put tracking systems on so they can determine how much their employees are working and when they're working, and bringing it right down to 6-minute calendars so that they can track. That does not foster a sense of trust. So we have to have some level of flexibility in a hybrid model. I know we still need to have some kind of stats and trackers, but think about how we trust our employees to do the right thing. Because I think, if anything, the pandemic has shown us that many of our employees, in fact, so many of our employees, I can never use the word all, can be trusted. The right and give great customer experience. So we need to begin to look at how we listen and learn from our employees, create a feedback culture, because we're all still learning in this environment. And so we need to learn to build a new culture of trust, because we don't have that ability to just walk around the office and see who's working. Next slide. Communication is always coming up as key. So what communications do you have in place? Begin to look at how we share an understanding of the communication models, how we create team meetings, which one should be Zoom, which one should be email, how we begin to create better networks in which people can actually meet and entertain on, whether that be a WhatsApp group, a Slack group, a Zoom group, whatever, but it's about how we communicate. I think one of the things that I had a little bit of contention with when I was observing things for a client was this big debate when I don't want to have my camera on because I don't look good on camera. I think we have to have better, clear guidelines, because I think if we're having a team meeting, people's cameras should be on. That's my personal choice, and I'm not saying that that's what we should do. But after interviewing people, it really created a bit of a divide. I found a way people are communicating camera on, camera off. I think it's a great opportunity to see our people and see them in that environment in which they're working, getting them to see each other. But again, that's my personal opinion. But it is something that we need to begin to look at the finite ways in which we communicate. What is the rules of engagement, and what tools are we using, and how everybody begins to embrace this working from home model as they move into any form of hybrid. Okay, so the next slide is, I can't see anybody's hands, but for anybody who has a dog or a pet, this is what I call my ways dog theory. And it's missing the word of in there, so it's my ways of working dog theory. But this is my dog Buster. And I have this theory that the universe finds our pets for us because I am Buster and Buster is me. He's a beagle, so he is very scatty. He's a little all over the place, but he can get into detail strategically when he needs to. The dog can open a bag by managing a zipper to get a shoe out of a zip bag. But there's so many different facets of Buster when I look at him as an individual. Buster loved coming to the office. He was an office dog. So from a pop, Buster always came into the office with us. And in that, he loves people. And one of the things that I'm noticing, and I have noticed during the pandemic, was his lack of connectivity to humans. And I could see him falling into a form of depression because his whole life was around going to the office. And I would drop him off at the office. That's where he'd be. And if I had client meetings, he was always in the office and always around people. And you could even see him there in his office chair. Well, that's not his office chair, but he always played a game. Anybody got out of the chair, he was always in it. And he just sat there like he thought he owned it. But there's so many different aspects of Buster. There's the lazy sleeping Buster. There's the Buster at play, and there's the Buster in team. So when I actually look at how we look at, say, a dog, we look at dogs as DNA. They're all so different. Each breed has their own characteristics, as does each one of our employees. So looking at a working model and a hybrid working model, we have to be considerate of all of the voices of our employees and all of the different personalities and aspects that even individuals have, and how we can begin to encompass that in a model. Because at the moment, there is no cookie cutter models. There's a lot of people trying a lot of things and finding the way that works. And it's about finding the one that works best for your organization. And that's when it gets exciting. It gets super exciting when we can redefine and rewrite the way we work with our people, and the rework and redefine the way that our people work with us as an organization. But that brings me back to the beginning, and that's why I always say the values, is come back to that one definer, because the one thing that I always find that connects all organizations is that set of who we are as an organization. Okay, so this is just so I can, wrapping up the presentation, I put together some top tips. I call them my 10 post-pandemic leadership learnings. Now, I know we're not in post-pandemic yet, but I'm living in a world that we are almost post-pandemic. As it begins to unwind, we can now begin to move into that zone 5 that I talked about and look at some of the learnings that we've had up until now. And that looks from all of our history to this last couple of years. So learning number 1, employees are adults and we all have stuff going on. And I think this is where we need to redefine some of the ways and processes that work with our employees. I think, over the last many years, that was always one of the bone of contentions when I did focus groups with employees, that they're treated like children. And I think if anything has shown us over these last 2 years is that our employees are much more resilient than we ever thought. And they should be rewarded by that. And that is where that trust model comes in. But I just keep saying employees are adults, and we need to start treating them like adults. And in that, we might find a new language on how we work together as a team. Learning number 2, autonomy does not mean free will, as it does require guidance and support. I remember doing a lecture many years ago, and it was all around autonomy, and we were talking about autonomy and mastery and purpose and several things. And one of the people in the audience at the end came up and asked, I don't feel comfortable with this autonomy, giving my employees free will to do whatever they want. And that erupted in an incredible debate, because autonomy does not mean free will. Okay, autonomy is freedom. It's freedom of choice. It's freedom of opportunity. It's freedom of voice. But it doesn't mean free will, do whatever you want, whenever you want. And even though some hybrid models get closer to that free will, it still always has to have a structure and constant support and guidance. Because we've got to remember that this is all new to our employees as well. And the things that we're learning now needs to have that support and that communication so that we can begin to build better communication and clearer boundaries as we move forward. Lesson number 3, leaders cannot control from their fear. And what I mean by that is, as a leader, we're all scared. We all don't know what's happening next. But that's kind of what it is to be a leader. Sometimes we have to position that fear differently, because we have to manage those that may also be in fear. And we need to manage people out of fear. And people just do not work well when they're in a period of fear. So our jobs as leaders are to inspire and to build confidence and purpose-driven teams. And I've never done a presentation that I don't mention my mom. And this is the one I thought of her because being a single mom, raising two kids, one of them me, uh, it was a very challenging time for her as a young mom. You know, we did not have a lot of money, and one of the things that she instilled in me talked about money in our house, and then later in life we talked about a lot about this, is because we didn't have any. She never wanted to have us as children worry because our jobs was to just be inspired and be kids. And I always think about that as well, how do people behave in a fear culture and in times of fear? And the pandemic has set that upon all of us. But now it's our job as leaders to begin to inspire confidence and purpose-driven teams because that is how we perform best, is when people like my mom manage it behind the scenes so that we can actually just be kids. Okay, learning number 4, we've got to make our employees part of the journey. This is a great opportunity to start hearing new voices, even the silent ones, and actually allow people to recognize that it's okay not to be okay. It's just not okay to stay that way, but it's okay not to be okay. And our employees are on this journey with us. This is a real opportunity to change what I was getting a lot of pre-pandemic was the this and them culture, the leaders versus the employees, and they all had differing opinions, and they also had in different parts of the office, and people were striving to create an open door policy and all of these things. Well, now we have this opportunity to redefine how our employees are part of our journey with us. So think about that going forward and begin to build models around hybrid, but hybrid it includes your employee's voice and what's important to them. Learning number 5, as we find the right path of our organization, diversity in thinking and the needs of our employee must be explored and understood. And what I mean by that is diversity of thinking. One thing that we're experiencing a lot of right now is differencing of opinions. And some of that results from working to mask wearing to all kinds of things that are happening. But I think one of the negative things that have come out of the pandemic is this diversity of opinion, which is not bad, but the way in which we are reacting to other people's opinions. So as leaders, we need to begin to embrace and listen to all. I don't have to always agree, but I need to explore and better understand other people's opinions and how the current climate and environment is affecting them. So that's something that is in all of our lives at the moment, and I think it's one that needs very careful consideration when building a model that represents everybody's voice. Learning number 6, employees need to truly understand the real-time direction of the business and where it's moving. I think that's one of the things that came up time and time again over my entire career, communication and how that impacts on the way employees feel about an organization. It's never been more key critical. Every day seems to change. Every day seems to be a new day in the current climate. And employees just need to know that things are moving and need to know that they're participants in the organization. And it's about how we are constantly evolving because we haven't defined this thing yet. Okay, and learning number 7, we need to start talking in truths. And this comes up over and over and over again in every single interview that I had is people just want to know the truth. They will feel more clear, more directed, but they will just feel more calm if they know that their leaders are speaking in truth. And so that is about how we create a culture of feedback and openness. And sometimes it's not about hearing the things I want to hear. It's hearing the things that I need to hear so I can better understand how I move forward. Learning number 8, employees should be recognized for embodying the true behaviors that bring life to the organization value. Yeah, again, over the last 15 years, that is the one constant I keep coming back to within the organization. What is our set of values? Who are we as an organization? And if you have a set of values, how do you redefine them in your current working models? And if you don't have a set of values, it's your opportunity to put some in, because it is the one connector that brings a very diverse group of people together under one high purpose. And the greatest purpose that we can all have is creating an incredible employee and incredible customer experience. And how do we do that, and what beliefs and behaviors will get us there? Learning number 9. I think with this one, face it, hybrid is here to stay in whatever way that's going to look, but nobody has achieved best practice yet. There is no cookie cutter model that it's one size fits all. I mean, people used to aspire to Google, they used to aspire to Apple, and we had all these great cultures like Zappos that we would go to conferences and all try to replicate them and emulate them and try to bring that back to organizations. I think what we realize is we're not Google, we're not Apple, and we're all organizations that now have an opportunity to create our own modelings that fit us, fit our organization. We can use best practices from all over the place, but at the end of the day, it's what works for you and your organization. And this is a great opportunity to actually get rid of the chains of the past and bring the best forward. And number 10, change can be both scary and exciting, and it's how it is packaged and sold. Change has always been an issue with an organizational culture. And some people embrace change a lot better than others, but it's how we package and sell it to our employees. If we talk in doom and gloom and worry and fear, or we talk in opportunity and excitement and work-life balance and listening and feedback, if we look at this as our opportunity to create something new that's aligned with the human elements of our business, then I can't see hybrid modeling not working within an organization. But it's finding the one that works for you. And again, the great thing about hybrid is, as we've seen in some of the previous chat, was there are so many different versions. It's about finding one that matches how you can best manage your people, their work-life balance, and the current safety requirements of your organization. And on conclusion, this whole work-life balance that we've been trying to achieve, in the early days, a lot of people were attributing hybrid working as being the answer. Hybrid working is not the answer alone. And I think what is more important is how we trust our employees, how we communicate with our employees, how we look at that feedback modeling. Because what I'm seeing in some of the hybrid working is stress is at an all-time high. People are juggling more than they ever juggled before. They're going from Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting without taking a break. They're trying to manage a work environment in their homes that might include their children having to be homeschooled, their pets running around while they're trying to be on camera, I think living in London, some of the properties are not as big as they are in America. So 4 or 5 call center agents having to work all from home now in one small flat. So we need to look at work-life balance and begin to embrace our people. We need to really reach out to them and find how we can help support their work-life balance, because hybrid modeling is not the answer. It's part of the answer if we get the solution right. So again, on ending on that, it's really about our chance to make a real difference. So begin to look at what can we do to make a hybrid model work for our organization. Okay, I think that's my end of time. So a little action plan that I always ask everybody to do is at some point, think about all the content and come up with one or a few things that you're going to stop doing as a leader, things you're going to start doing on how we embrace hybrid working, and things that you guys already do well. And that's the stuff that we should really say, well done, team. Let's continue doing that. So thank you for your time.
And there
questions if anybody has.
Yes, there was one question in the chat from Kia talking about how are they social distancing if the entire team is there at once?
Yeah, and that's why the hybrid model is in place, because one team is there all at once. So when we're doing 1 week, 1 off, 1 week, if it's the 1 week on, 1 week off model, other teams will come on the alternate week. So it's almost like having the workforce within the organization. So therefore they're able to manage social distancing a lot better because they're able to create a much bigger workspace.
Thank you. And anyone else that has some tips on social distancing when in the office, again, the networking cafe is a great place to meet up with everyone. And there's also some other great tips in the chat from Shannon and Monica and DJ and some others. So if people want to check that out in the chat.
Okay,
Great.
well, thank you so much, Dale. That was amazing and so interesting. And I know it's been on the forefront of all of our minds for the last year and a half and going forward. We really appreciate the information. Certainly the 10 learnings were I think I know for myself, I have certainly learned a lot just from the last half hour or so. So
Yeah, if I just want to reiterate the one point is, everybody is still learning. So,
yes.
And that's the best learning that I did from all of the research and all of the dialogue and conversations I had was take a little bit of pressure off yourself because nobody's got it defined 100% yet. And that's the great opportunity. But that's the thing that we just need to recognize is that we're all still learning.
All right. Well, thank you again. And we will make sure to be able to share your information on this last slide with Facebook contact, also be able to contact through our ACCCP website as well. So Dale, thank you for your time and coming in from Canada to present to us and for your flexibility and patience with our little technical glitch. But thank you again. All right.
Working
Take
together.
care.
Okay.
Thank you.